the bizarre justice system of ancient Babylonia in the cradle of civilization, where humanity first learned to write laws on clay tablets and build cities that touched the sky. There existed a justice system so strange, so elaborate, and so utterly alien to modern minds that it seems like something from a fever dream rather than historical reality. This is the story of Babylonian justice, where the punishment for theft might be determined by the phase of the moon, where a single lie could result in your tongue being cut out and fed to temple cats, and where the gods themselves were called upon to serve as judges in trials that would make modern courtrooms seem like children's games. Today, we journey back over 4,000 years to explore the bizarre world of ancient Babylonian law, where justice was not blind, but had eyes that saw into the spiritual realm, and where every crime rippled through both the earthly and divine worlds with consequences that modern legal systems could never imagine. Our story begins with Hammurabi, the king who would create the world's first written legal code around 1750 BC. But Hammurabi's laws were not simply rules written by human authority. They were divine commandments received directly from Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, in a vision that lasted 7 days and 7 nights. Picture the scene. King Hammurabi sits in meditation atop the great ziggurat of Babylon, a massive stepped pyramid that served as a bridge between earth and heaven. For a full week, he neither eats nor drinks, his consciousness opened to receive divine wisdom about how justice should function in the mortal world. The laws that emerged from this divine revelation were unlike anything that had existed before. They were not abstract principles, but specific, detailed instructions for handling every conceivable human conflict. More importantly, they recognized that justice existed on multiple levels simultaneously: the physical, the spiritual, and the cosmic. Hammurabi's code contained 282 specific laws, each one a window into the bizarre logic of Babylonian justice. But these were not merely human rules. They were cosmic principles that had to be followed exactly, or the very fabric of reality would begin to unravel. Consider the famous principle of an eye for an eye, which most people think they understand. But in Babylonian law, this was not simply about equivalent punishment. It was about maintaining cosmic balance through precise spiritual mathematics. If someone destroyed another person's eye, the offender's own eye had to be removed in exactly the same manner, using the same type of instrument, at the same time of day, with the same number of witnesses present. But here's where Babylonian justice becomes truly bizarre. The punishment had to be carried out by someone of equivalent social status to the original victim. If a nobleman's eye was destroyed by a commoner, the commoner's eye couldn't simply be removed by anyone. It had to be removed by another nobleman, ensuring that the spiritual energy released by the punishment matched exactly the spiritual energy of the original crime. This concept of spiritual equivalence permeated every aspect of Babylonian law. Theft was not simply taking someone's property. It was disrupting the cosmic order that determined who should possess what. The punishment for theft, therefore, had to restore not just the material loss, but the spiritual balance that had been disturbed. The most common punishment for theft was not imprisonment or fines, but ritual humiliation designed to publicly restore the thief's proper place in the cosmic hierarchy. Thieves would be paraded through the streets wearing masks that identified their specific crime, while crowds threw mud mixed with their own waste at them. But the mask was not simply a mark of shame. It was a magical object that trapped the thief's criminal impulses and prevented them from committing future crimes. These masks were made by temple artisans using clay mixed with sacred herbs and the blood of animals sacrificed specifically for this purpose. The thief would be required to wear this mask for a period determined by consulting the movements of celestial bodies. Astrologer priests would calculate exactly how long the cosmic imbalance created by the theft would persist, and the mask could only be removed when the stars returned to the same configuration they had been in before the crime was committed. But Babylonian justice recognized that some crimes were so serious that they created permanent tears in the cosmic fabric that could never be fully repaired. These crimes required punishments that would echo through multiple generations, affecting not just the criminal, but their entire bloodline. The crime of blasphemy, speaking disrespectfully of the gods, was considered so dangerous that it threatened the stability of the entire universe. The punishment was not simply death, but spiritual annihilation designed to erase the blasphemer from existence so completely that even the gods would forget they had ever lived. This punishment, known as the Great Forgetting, involved a ceremony that lasted for an entire month. The blasphemer would be kept alive in a special chamber beneath the temple, while priests worked to systematically erase every trace of their existence from the world. Their name would be chiseled off every document, monument, and record where it appeared. Their family would be required to undergo purification rituals to cleanse themselves of association with the criminal. Even their physical possessions would be destroyed in sacred fires, with the ashes scattered in rivers to carry away any lingering spiritual contamination. But the most bizarre aspect of the Great Forgetting was the treatment of the criminal's memories. Babylonian priests believed that memories were physical objects stored in the brain, and that these could be extracted and destroyed through surgical procedures combined with magical rituals. The condemned would undergo a process where temple physician priests would drill small holes in their skull and insert bronze instruments designed to physically remove specific memories. The goal was to erase not just their memory of committing blasphemy, but their memory of ever having existed at all. The extracted memories were believed to be visible as small, pearl-like objects that would be collected in sacred vessels and burned in temple fires. The smoke from these burning memories was thought to carry the criminal's very essence away to a realm of non-existence, where they would suffer eternal oblivion. Babylonian justice also included a category of crimes that were considered so unnatural that they threatened to invert the cosmic order and turn the world upside down. These inversion crimes included things like children striking their parents, slaves correcting their masters, or women speaking in religious ceremonies. The punishments for inversion crimes were designed to restore proper cosmic hierarchy through rituals that would seem utterly insane to modern observers. A child who struck their parent would have their hand cut off, but not in the way you might expect. The severed hand would be preserved through mummification techniques and then sewn onto the parent's body, usually at the shoulder or chest. The idea was that the child's rebellious hand would now serve the parent forever, literally becoming part of their body and unable to commit further acts of disobedience. The child would then be required to serve their parent, using only their remaining hand, constantly reminded of their crime by seeing their own severed appendage attached to the person they had wronged. This punishment could last for years, with the mummified hand gradually decaying on the parent's body while the child learned proper submission. Even stranger were the punishments for crimes committed by animals. Babylonian law recognized that animals could commit crimes, and that these crimes required formal legal proceedings to address the cosmic imbalance they created. If an ox killed a person, the ox would be brought before a formal court where evidence would be presented and testimony would be heard. The ox would be represented by a human advocate who would argue for mitigation based on the animal's previous behavior and the circumstances of the killing. If found guilty, the ox would be executed, but not simply slaughtered. The execution had to follow the same procedures used for human criminals, including public proclamation of the sentence, last rites performed by priests, and burial in specially consecrated ground. But here's where it gets truly bizarre. The ox's owner would also face trial for the crime of allowing their animal to commit murder. This was based on the Babylonian belief that animals were extensions of their owner's spiritual essence, and that any crime committed by an animal reflected a moral failing in the human who controlled it. The punishment for the owner often involved a ritual where they would be required to take on characteristics of the criminal animal. They might be forced to lie in the animal's stall, eat the same food, and perform the same types of labor the animal had performed, essentially becoming the replacement for the executed beast. Babylonian courts also dealt with crimes that modern legal systems don't even recognize as crimes. The crime of dream theft involved deliberately entering another person's dreams and stealing their dream content for your own use. Dream thieves were usually sorcerers or priests who had learned techniques for projecting their consciousness into other people's sleeping minds. They would steal prophetic dreams, pleasurable experiences, or important messages from the gods, leaving their victims with nightmares or empty sleep. The trial process for dream theft was unlike anything in modern legal systems. The accused and the accuser would both be given sleeping potions and placed in specially prepared chambers where temple priests would monitor their dreams using techniques that combined psychology, pharmacology, and magic. Dream interpreters would examine the content of both people's dreams, looking for evidence that dream content had been transferred from one mind to another. They would analyze symbolic elements, emotional content, and narrative structure to determine whether theft had actually occurred. If the accused was found guilty of dream theft, the punishment involved a reversal ritual where they would be forced to give the victim access to their own dreams for a period equal to the time they had spent stealing. This created a bizarre situation where the criminal would sleep under supervision while the victim was given magical access to experience and control their dreams. But perhaps the strangest aspect of Babylonian justice was the role played by divine intervention in legal proceedings. Babylonian courts didn't simply make decisions based on evidence and testimony. They actively consulted the gods to determine guilt or innocence. This consultation took many forms, but the most common was the practice of extispicy, divination through examination of animal entrails. When a court case was particularly difficult or the evidence was ambiguous, a sheep or goat would be sacrificed, and its internal organs would be examined by skilled diviners. The shape, color, and condition of the liver, heart, lungs, and intestines were interpreted according to complex systems of symbolic meaning that had been developed over centuries. Each mark, blemish, or irregularity in the organs was believed to be a message from the gods about the guilt or innocence of the accused. But the gods didn't limit their involvement to simple guilty or innocent verdicts. They would also specify punishments, determine the timing of sentences, and even indicate whether mercy should be shown. A liver with certain markings might indicate that the accused was guilty, but that their punishment should be delayed until a specific date determined by astronomical calculations. Even more bizarre was the practice of allowing the gods to serve as witnesses in trials. Temple statues were believed to be inhabited by divine consciousness and could observe and remember events that occurred in their presence. These divine witnesses could be called upon to testify in court through elaborate rituals performed by specially trained priest lawyers. The statue would be brought into the courtroom and placed in a position where it could see all participants. Questions would be addressed to the god inhabiting the statue, and the answers would be interpreted through various methods, including the movement of smoke from incense burners, the behavior of sacred animals released in the courtroom, or direct communication through priests trained in divine language. Babylonian justice also recognized the possibility that crimes could be committed against the gods themselves, and that these crimes required punishments that extended beyond the earthly realm. The most serious of these divine crimes was temple robbery, stealing objects that had been consecrated to the gods. Temple robbery was not simply theft, it was considered an act of war against the divine realm that threatened the relationship between humans and gods that kept civilization functioning. The punishment for temple robbery, therefore, had to address not just the material loss, but the cosmic consequences of divine anger. The convicted temple robber would undergo a punishment called divine exile, where they would be ritually separated from human society and delivered to the gods for direct punishment. This didn't mean simple execution. It meant a complex process designed to transfer the criminal from human to divine jurisdiction. The process began with the criminal being declared legally dead while still alive. Their property would be distributed, their family would hold funeral rites, and their name would be removed from all official records. But their body would be kept alive and delivered to the temple for divine justice. Inside the temple, The criminal would be placed in a special chamber designed to replicate the divine realm. They would be cared for by priests, but would no longer be considered human. Instead, they would exist in a liminal state between life and death, waiting for the gods to determine their ultimate fate. Some temple robbers would remain in this state for years, maintained by temple resources, but cut off from all human contact and legal rights. They were considered divine property, to be disposed of according to divine will rather than human law. The complexity of Babylonian legal procedures was staggering even by modern standards. A single court case might involve testimony from human witnesses, divine consultation through multiple forms of divination, examination of physical evidence according to religious principles, and consideration of cosmic factors like planetary alignments and seasonal cycles. Legal documents from Babylonian courts show cases that lasted for months or even years as judges consulted various forms of divine guidance and waited for celestial conditions to align properly for rendering verdicts. Justice was not about speed or efficiency. It was about achieving perfect cosmic balance through painstaking attention to spiritual detail. The training required to become a Babylonian judge was more like becoming a priest than a modern lawyer. Judges needed to master not just legal principles, but astronomy, mathematics, divination, medicine, and theology. They were expected to understand how human actions affected cosmic balance and how divine will manifest it in earthly affairs. Babylonian law also recognized that some individuals possess special spiritual characteristics that affected how they should be treated by the justice system. Priests, royal family members, and people born under certain astronomical conditions were subject to different legal procedures than ordinary citizens. But this wasn't simply a matter of privilege. It reflected the Babylonian understanding that different types of people had different relationships with the cosmic order and therefore required different approaches to justice. A priest who committed a crime was believed to create different spiritual consequences than a farmer who committed the same crime. The most bizarre category of special legal status was reserved for people who had been struck by lightning and survived. Babylonians believed that lightning was a direct communication from the gods, and that anyone who survived a lightning strike had been marked for special divine attention. Lightning survivors were considered to exist partially in the divine realm and were therefore subject to different laws than ordinary humans. They could not be executed for any crime, as this would be interfering with divine will. Instead, they would be given punishments that involved service to the temples or exile to sacred locations where they could fulfill whatever divine purpose their lightning strike had indicated. As we examine the bizarre justice system of ancient Babylonia, we're confronted with a worldview so different from our own that it challenges our basic assumptions about law, punishment, and the nature of justice itself. The Babylonians didn't see justice as a human institution designed to maintain social order. They saw it as a cosmic principle that had to be maintained through precise ritual procedures that kept the earthly and divine realms in proper balance. Their punishments weren't designed primarily to deter crime, or rehabilitate criminals. They were designed to repair spiritual damage and restore cosmic harmony that had been disrupted by wrongdoing. This meant that Babylonian justice was incredibly complex, involving considerations that modern legal systems don't even recognize as relevant. Every crime had to be evaluated not just for its earthly consequences, but for its effects on divine will, cosmic balance, and the spiritual health of the community. The legacy of Babylonian justice influenced legal systems throughout the ancient world and established principles that persist in modified forms even today. The concept of proportional punishment, the importance of written law, and the idea that justice must be publicly administered all trace their origins to the bizarre but sophisticated system developed in ancient Mesopotamia. But perhaps the most important lesson from Babylonian justice is how it reveals the human need to find meaning and cosmic significance in the administration of punishment. The Babylonians created a system that was elaborate, mystical, and often cruel because they believed that justice had to address not just earthly wrongs, but spiritual imbalances that threatened the very fabric of reality. As we reflect on this ancient system, we're reminded that all concepts of justice are culturally constructed, and that what seems normal to one society may seem bizarre to another. The Babylonians would undoubtedly find our modern legal systems just as strange as we find theirs. Their justice system, with its divine consultations, cosmic calculations, and spiritual punishments, represents humanity's earliest attempt to create formal procedures for distinguishing right from wrong and determining appropriate consequences for wrongdoing. The clay tablets that preserve Babylonian legal decisions continue to speak to us across 4 millennia, reminding us that the search for justice is one of humanity's oldest and most persistent concerns, even when the methods used to achieve it seem utterly alien to modern understanding.